Cool. So we're officially live. So everyone that has connected, thank you so much, guys. My human capital, always beautiful, always smiling, but very, very disposable and exchangeable human capital. I love you guys. Thanks everyone for being here on time. Today we have something that seems to be like a joyful conversation between me and Eddie, my new friend, my comrade. So Eddie, how are you, bro?
Good. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm excited.
No, come on, man. It's a big pleasure. People that know me from the channel before know that I really try to connect people from different region and that are on board and online with the same effort of making Marxism more relatable, more understandable, more approachable, but also showing the praxis, not beyond the theory of Marxism itself, and the fact that we have to stand together because logic of capital is very easy to approach and very dominant and very self-evident, but we leftists, we Marxists, we materialists, we have to stick by each other. So, Eddie, I was taught this lesson, and I always try to apply it that we never know whose videos and whose first video is this. So there's always a first time for somebody watching this. So if you don't mind doing a little introduction about your background, about what you do, and about the current content creation that you do, and then from there we go into the questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. My name's Eddie Liger Smith. That's what I've been going on online. Um, yeah, I started the website MidwesternMarx.com. We have a YouTube channel, Twitter, TikTok, all that stuff in 2020 with my buddy Carlos, who is a philosophy major and is now getting his PhD in teaching philosophy while we run the website. So yeah, he kind of introduced me to Marxism. We got involved with organizing through the Bernie Sanders campaign in the U.S., which was a sort of social democratic, soft left sort of campaign that drew Carlos and I both in. But then we found Marxism and Marxism-Leninism and continued reading and developing our website and stuff like that. So yeah, what originally got me into politics was my dad was a teacher. And the governor in my home state of Wisconsin busted up the teachers' unions and cut their paychecks, which triggered massive strikes and uprisings from the teachers and kind of showed me at a young age how corrupt the capitalist system and the capitalist political superstructure is. So, yeah, that kind of sent me on a mission to get involved with politics and make the world a better place, which led me to Marxism. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think we shared that. Like, I don't know how familiar you are with my story, but it was something similar in the sense that a real life event, like the birth of my first child, and the fact that he was born with a very rare disease that threw him almost instantly into disability, got me really sensitive about the notions of capacitism and logic of productivity and how. Inhumane in most senses the capitalist system tends to be, and the fact that if we don't take like a hands-on approach into the system, it will not eventually change itself by a fact of magic. So going into the proper questions, I wanted to speak with you about, Eddie. So most of my crowd are in Mexico, and being in the border with the US, we have this saying that in Spanish it goes lejos de Dios y muy cerca de Estados Unidos, that it means that we are very far from God but too close to the US. And that puts Mexico in a very complicated position as we are currently living in this de-dollarization, and a new multipolar world is potentially emerging due to new potencies around the world. What's your currently reading on what's going on in the world and in the US before we start to talk about the new cycle of elections that are coming forward?
Yeah, just in general, I think we're moving towards multipolarity. I think since World War II, we've been in an era of U.S. unipolarity, especially since 1990 or 1991 with the fall of the USSR. Like, you had them to kind of provide a check on the U.S. and what they were able to do after World War II, especially with them being in the United Nations Security Council. And the first 50 regime change efforts that the U.S. tried to do after the UN was formed were vetoed by the Soviet Union. So when they collapsed, that sort of umbrella of protection is no longer over the global South and countries like Iraq, who the U.S. immediately bombed to a pre-industrial state in the Gulf War and then kept them under sanctions, killing 500,000 children, which Madeleine Albright later said was worth it on 60 Minutes. But that's kind of the situation where we've been the last 30 years with the unchecked U.S. power. But now, because of the rise of China, sort of the reestablishment of Russia on the global stage, and then really with the global ties and relationships that they've been forming through BRICS and through these trade deals aimed at mutual development, win-win trade relations.
What are those?
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
what are those? Like these are new for most of the world. It's insane.
All right, the U.S. doesn't understand it, so they just say China's debt trapping. They project what we've done to every country onto China, but
It's
yeah, I think
ridiculous.
that's threatening.
China has like 5% debt of most countries in Africa, and they're talking about the Chinese debt trap. It's ridiculous. Propaganda is too good.
It is too good, right?
Yeah.
As China is canceling countries' debt and only investing in equity and doing really the same thing that the U.S. did with the West European countries with the Marshall Plan after World War II, was gave them all these low interest loans to help them develop. So, the U.S. is no longer able to maintain this spot as the hegemon, and the ruling class in our country is basically throwing a tantrum, for lack of a better word. They're unstable. They're pushing us towards World War III, and they can't stand that they're not going to be the hegemon anymore.
It's crazy. So yeah, so it's a perfect segue into the several questions that I wanted to talk with you. So how do you feel? So let's go topic by topic. In the potential event of this massive de-dollarization and the fact that the world won't be obligated to do trades into dollar, and they have these alternatives, the SWIFT option, the SWIFT digitalization is probably going to be replaced as well. How do you think the American economy will react, and what can be done in order to, let's say, ameliorate the impact of the potential de-dollarization? Because you're going to have a backflow of dollars coming from all over the world, of people that don't want a toxic currency anymore. And then what? Massive inflation, unemployment. Is it relatable to productivity anymore? Like even with the gold standard gone, what does dollar stand for if it's not bellical protection and this military intervention around the world? What do dollars buy in the future where they don't have the hegemonic power anymore?
I mean, it's a good question. I don't think anyone knows, but it's going to be interesting, but also scary and dangerous, because I don't know how the U.S. is going to react. The communists in this country certainly aren't ready for like a comprehensive crisis like that. Like we're not ready to jump into organizing and use a revolutionary moment like that to wake up the workers. Because what ideally the U.S. should do is move towards socialism, nationalize major industries, and then join BRICS. I mean, it sounds ridiculous that the U.S. would join BRICS at this point because of our foreign policy establishment. But I mean, that's what makes the most sense. Join in on these win-win trade relations with China and other countries. But, they're not going to do that unless our ruling class is overthrown. So I see that as the only path forward to avoiding a comprehensive crisis and a collapse. But I think the collapse might precede, people in this country waking up and finally overthrowing our ruling class, finally forming a revolutionary movement. But yeah, I don't know. It's a tough question, and I wish I could look at a crystal ball and see into the future, but I'm not sure what's going to happen, and I'm anxious about it for sure.
No, and in the end, we're both materialists. There's no looking into the future. The only thing we can do is understand material conditions and relations and analyze them in a way. So, having said that, what's your current reading for the next cycle of elections, Eddie?
In the U.S.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be so interesting. I mean, right now, I think Trump is going to be hard to stop.
You think he's main contender? He's the number one candidate?
Yeah, the media establishment is really anti-Trump right now because he's just an outsider. Like they want someone like Obama who's going to put a nice smiling face and an articulate spokesman at the head of the U.S. war machine. They don't want someone like Trump who's not an explicit anti-imperialist, but someone who's going to kind of get in the way of their imperialist projects and what they actually want to get done. Someone who's not part of the club. But his base is still extremely strong. I think the other main contender is Ron DeSantis, who's the governor of Florida, and he's awful, terrible. Oversaw torture at Guantanamo Bay. One of his main things is pushing for stronger ties with Israel and more money to Israel. But I think the more that people in this country are exposed to DeSantis, the less they're going to like him. And unfortunately, with Trump, it seems to be the opposite. The more that he's exposed, the more people are kind of drawn to his rhetoric. And a lot of that, you know, he talks about ending the wars, bringing jobs back, populist rhetoric that people like. He didn't follow through on any of it as president, but, you know, that's kind of what people are drawn to. And then on the Democratic side, you have Robert F. Kennedy, the great nephew of JFK, now jumping in the race and challenging Biden, which is interesting, talking about COVID-related stuff and some things that are real hot-button issues. So that could make things interesting on the Democratic side. And, you know, who wins in the general, I don't know. It's probably too early to tell. But if I had to lean towards anyone, unfortunately, maybe it would be Trump. Not that I would vote for Trump. That's why I think he'll probably win.
Yeah. So it's insane because correct me if I'm wrong, but the Democratic Party said that they're not going to have any debates, right? They're just going to appoint Biden again.
Yeah.
Oh, that's insane. Do you think Biden has any possibility of winning? Like his
know.
likabilities through the floors is ridiculous.
Right. I think he has a good chance of winning the Democratic primary because they'll basically rig it for him.
Yeah.
Which is part of what made me a communist, was participating in the Democratic primary for Bernie Sanders. And it's just it's rigged. It's
a shit show. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. The DNC and the Democratic establishment rig it. But in the general, yeah, I think Biden's in trouble. I think, you know, inflation has gotten worse. People's living standards have decreased. He's incredibly unpopular. If it's him versus Trump, he's in trouble.
Yeah, we'll get to the democratic system after that. I just want to close this notion between Trump and DeSantis, because I don't really see Biden as a candidate at all, unless they completely rig it again to give him the election. But otherwise, we're probably going to see, as you said, somebody like Trump or DeSantis. I think DeSantis is growing fast, but I found your comment about his like the direct opposition between his likability and public exposure, that the more he shows up, the less people like him. Because I agree, in some points, I think he's too radical. Even compared to Trump, he's too radical in some of his points of view. And his background in Guantanamo is just scary, plain scary. That's ridiculous. It's crazy that you can have a torturer become the president of a country. It's like, it's movie titled. It's like this movie content is so weird. But then on the other hand, what do you think about DeSantis' relationship with Elon Musk, for example?
Yeah, I do think that will help him. There are a lot of people who, I mean, it's also crazy because Elon, he owns Twitter. Yeah. So it's like people like us get censored from these social media outlets, but then people in the political establishment are best buddies with the people who own the social media outlets. So they're able to manipulate social media and these platforms pretty much in any way they want to boost themselves, which is what DeSantis tried to do by launching his campaign on Twitter, which kind of ended up being a disaster, actually, because the servers crashed. But yeah,
I saw.
Yeah, I think having powerful friends like that is helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, plus the money will help as well. It's crazy because I've always had this notion that, in a way, you guys are very accustomed to the notion of lobbying in politics, but in the rest of the world, it's just plain corruption. We have it's a synonym, but is perceived differently, even if the action is exactly the same. But the fact that you have lobbying in the US makes democracy function as if you were already in a libertarian state, in a way. Like, if you have legalized lobby, you live in a libertarian state. I mean, you just have democracy as an extra mechanism to regulate the relationship between the power and intention of money and how it regulates and creates public policy. But in the end, in practice, we call it neoliberalism, whatever. For me, it's pretty close to a libertarian state in practice. I don't know if you share the point of view, but it's not a person a vote. It's more like $1 a vote.
Absolutely. I mean, it has even gotten to the point where lobbying groups write most of the bills themselves that get passed. And there was a controversy there was a law related to the prisons a while back. And when the law was submitted, it had this prison lobby called ALEC had stamped their logo on it, and they forgot to remove it before they turned it in. So everyone saw that they had straight up written the bill. And I even had a college professor who was part of the local Republican Party, a chairman on the Republican Party, told me that, yeah, all of our laws are decided by lobbyists. You have no control in this country. And she was saying it. She's like, that's not a bad thing, though. It's fine. I'm like, what do you mean it's not a bad thing? What, the corporations who are lobbying the government don't have my interests in mind, you know? But yeah, it's just an accepted fact here.
Yeah, it's insane. That's why it makes it so hard. Which leads me into the next question, Eddie. Well, before that one, I'm going to make one more on the Santis. So one of the things that is very interesting for us in Latin America is the fact that now there's a heavy conversation around the use of fentanyl and the fact that Mexico is getting the blame for the production of fentanyl. We know it's a long chain that involves several countries, but Mexico is getting the blame because it's easier as a narrative just to pinpoint the enemy on the other side of the border, right? So the fact is that most Republicans are running, and this is what is scary, no? Because Republicans seems like they're going to swing back into power, as you know, as history repeats itself, as Hegel said, and Marx and Engels repeated. It seems like Republicans are swinging back into power, and the fact is that all Republicans have the same idea of having a military intervention in Mexico. So what's your take on this? Do you think they're bluffing? Is like a power move? Do you think there's realistic intentions? What would be your advice for Mexicans? Should we move out now or like after the elections?
Oh, it's a good question. I don't know. It's tough. I haven't thought about it necessarily from the Mexican perspective or like how serious they are about it. I don't know if they're bluffing or if they're serious. I do know, and we publish a yearly journal at Midwestern Marx, and my last journal article, which you can get on our website, was about the opioid crisis and all the people dying of fentanyl addiction. And we know at this point that it was created by American pharmaceutical companies. Yep. They spent millions of dollars marketing their drugs, lying to physicians, influencing medical schools and the academy to push physicians to prescribe more and more opioids while downplaying the risks, which has led to a huge influx of heroin and fentanyl, because when people can't afford their prescriptions, they switch to the cheaper street drugs, which are heroin and fentanyl. So then you have these Republicans who are in the pockets of these pharmaceutical companies coming out and saying, let's invade Mexico to stop the fentanyl crisis that they created, the opioid crisis that they created because of their greed, and because of the fact that they'll prioritize profit over dosing people with opioids and giving them horrific addictions and problems. So I just mainly see the hypocrisy of it, but I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't put it past the U.S. to do something like that. We did illegally and offensively invade Iraq and never apologized for it, but it just seems so absurd that the U.S. would send troops into Mexico, especially for that reasoning, that I have to feel like they're bluffing. But yeah, who knows?
For me, what creates in a way the perfect storm is the fact that with de-dollarization and the fact that the dollar is backed by not a respective or a proportional productive power beyond the currency, is that it's a predatory state in a way. It's a predatory imperial development model. What the Anglo had, what the Germans had, and what the U.S. has is basically at the predatory imperialist model. And the fact that they have to steal the surplus value from other productive forces in order to accumulate currency and capital leaves them in a very vulnerable state. So of course they're going to look into the borders, which is probably going to be the quick hits and the quick wins where they can steal surplus value and even much natural resources immediately in order to compensate for that loss in competitivity that they're going to inevitably have during this process of de-dollarization. I think empires tend to be very aggressive when they're against the wall. And like in Lenin said this in imperialism of the higher stage of capitalism, we know that this violence tends to escalate, especially when they are against the wall. So I think it's interesting that we're going to have the three things at the same time. So the fentanyl crisis, the election, and the multi-front bellical conflicts that the U.S. is involved with. And they're very expensive. Like, I mean, sustaining wars in Ukraine, Taiwan, and Middle East at the same time and Israel, it's expensive as fuck. And if you don't have the productive forces behind it to actually invest in those spots, it's going to be weird. And the only thing that gives me a shiver of hope in this moment is that I think most soldiers, even American soldiers, wouldn't fight without a salary. So it will may come to a point where the flow of cash and the amount of debt is going to be unsustainable to have so many bellical fronts heating and active at the same time. So that maybe give us a place of maneuver, and will push the U.S. into actually choosing their battles and avoiding those bellical conflicts. I don't know if you agree with the analysis.
Yeah, I do, and I even think it could be. I mean, if you look at the Russian Revolution, like you said, the czars were just sending people to fight and die in these useless wars for expansion. The Bolsheviks went to the military and organized a lot of them, and basically had a military mutiny. That's something I've been urging communists in the U.S. to start doing, is talking to their friends who are in the military, and because a lot of people sign up for free college or because they don't have any other economic opportunities. So, like you said, like, a lot of them don't have that blind loyalty, that patriotism to the military. Like, a lot of people after 9/11 enlisted because of 9/11. Like, we got to go get these terrorists before they come get us. That after Iraq and Afghanistan, that attitude's kind of dead among the younger generation. Nobody really buys that anymore. They're all just joining the military for economic opportunity. So I agree with you that they wouldn't fight for a salary. And I also agree that the ruling class of imperialism gets more desperate, or is more dangerous as they get more desperate. I mean, look at how close they're pushing us to the brink of World War III right now.
It's insane.
And yeah, I also agree that the U.S. and their Western allies don't have the manufacturing base, the industrial base. They don't have the productive base to keep up with Russia and China anymore. They're used to fighting a bunch of smaller wars all around the world. You know, they're not prepared for a direct conflict. You know, does that mean that they turn to a country like Mexico and try and, you know, start exploiting them? I hope not, but
yeah, I hope so. I hope not as well. So the next question is, how is it to be a communist in the US, man? I mean, you are literally like in the eye of the storm. I always get this crazy paranoia every time I travel and I have to use my passport. I was recently in Chicago because I went to a Blink 182 concert, and I swear to God, like, I always, like, I have my shirts, and like I'm openly communist. I don't really care. I post it everywhere. I tell everyone. But every time I go to the US, I'm just remembering like Operation Condor and what you guys did in, like, what the US did in Chile, and I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing? This can actually be dangerous eventually.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and even our own communist Operation COINTELPRO, and
Oh
you
yeah,
know, the Red Scare. There's been so many communists murdered by our own government just for being communists. And yeah, I mean, it is crazy. The amount of hate that you have to deal with is kind of out of control. So I actually lost my job recently amidst an emailing campaign from a bunch of fascists and liberal adjacent fascists who were emailing them and demanding that I be fired for being a communist, sending like, communism is the same thing as Nazism. You know, this guy supports Stalin. Stalin's the same as Hitler. Why do you have him around kids? So eventually I did end up actually losing that job. So stuff like that. I've been doxxed. I've had my address and my phone number released in public by some liberals who were mad about what I was saying about Venezuela, because I was supporting the socialist project in Venezuela. So it's stuff like that. It's no joke. I mean, there's people who are really out to get you, and we've had to learn to be a little bit more careful. But at the same time, you know, like communism used to just be anti-Americanism. You know, communism is just the opposite of what we are. And that came, I think, from the years of Red Scare propaganda and McCarthyism. But the younger generation is not like that at all. The younger generation is like, you tell them, like, look at our system. This isn't working. And you explain it to them. You explain to them how imperialism is structured, and it makes sense with them like that. It just clicks. And we've got a huge base of young communists and socialists and people who are getting educated. So amongst the younger generation, it's a lot better.
Yeah, we have material reality on our side. Yeah, Che Guevara used to say that, and is a sentence that always gives me hope when in these dire moments. Like, they can fight, they can scream, they can be hysterical about it, but we materialists, we have material reality on our side and history on our side as well. So let's see how it eventually unfolds. But going from there, Eddie. And how is your actually day-to-day relationship between theory and praxis? Are you still involved into any political movements or supporting any active candidates, or what's your plan?
Yeah, I'm in CPUSA, so the Communist Party USA, and I try and boost them. I also run a club in my area that we've actually been building and growing. We've mostly, one of my friends who I met through the Bernie campaign, who's also now a communist and Marxist, runs the local homeless shelter. So we've been doing
Awesome.
a lot of events out of there. But we want to forge some closer ties with unions. And I've had people reaching out online who are in the area who want to join the club. You always got to be a little careful with that, meeting people online,
Yeah.
but I definitely want to continue growing it and start launching some stuff on the ground as much as we can.
Hmm. Yeah, it's important for people to connect. Me and my brother as well. My brother is also a philosopher. We have a reading group as well that we are expanding, but we do most of our events digitally. Plus, what I told you, I would love to have you in Confluencia in the next few years, where I'm trying to gather like-minded thinkers from around the world to see how we can help each other and how we can share information and have these geopolitical conversations that cross borders and in a way align our interests to be able to cooperate, because you never know, eh? Like
For
in the
sure.
end, like you said, new generations are emerging, and it's crazy how powerful are the online voices currently in political campaigns. Like the fact that we can back or not back a specific candidate can be actually a very important campaign movement or a very important asset for people to make an educated decision. Eddie, moving into the next part of the conversation, and this is also something we have in common. Like I became, in a way, I've been an how do you say, a conference guy for a very long time. I've been giving conferences in Latin America and around the world for the past almost 10 years in different topics. Like philosophy is kind of recent for me for the last 4 years. And because I was involved in a huge digital debate with a debate lord from Mexico, and it went let's say very much one-sided. The guy ended very poorly, very badly. And after that, I started creating content for social media, and I capitalized on the attention, on the fact that I was given the spotlight and the microphone, which they will regret forever. But now I can't. Now they can't take it back. They will have to tear it down on my cold dead hands. And I know you recently participated in a debate as well, and it's somebody that I despise. I have to be honest with you. I've like Vosh for me, it represents all that I hate from the left. To be honest with you, because like metaphysical ideological left is utter bullshit. Like I think it's even worse than conservative nationalism. Like I'm that drastic about my reading. So can you tell us a little bit of how was the setup, how was the experience, and then we can go in some of the topic talking points.
Yeah, it sounds like a very similar situation to what happened with you, but he's just a debate lord who, and I knew that going into it. I knew he wasn't going to have any real substantive points. He was just going to try and use rhetorical tricks because that's what he does. But yeah, it's basically like he takes the quote unquote left wing position on social issues, on cultural issues, and that's what he talks about all the time and uses to garner his audience. But then when it comes to imperialism, when it comes to capitalism, he sides with the State Department every single time, every time. And it's to the point where he said, we had a debate about North Korea about a year ago, and he said it would have been better if the US-backed fascist dictatorship would have taken over all of Korea instead of Kim Il-sung and the communists in the north. So he'll side with US-backed fascist dictators ahead of his communists and our comrades internationally, and then call himself a communist. So it's the most disgusting thing. As you said, it's really everything I hate about the left distilled into one person, is Vaush.
Yeah, exactly. And it's crazy because it's even predictable, the fact that liberalism will always side with fascism because before siding with communism. Always. This is something people have to learn and be very much aware and careful about reformists. Because in a way, reformists they are saying like, we don't want five white guys to have all the power. We want five guys, two girls, and maybe one black guy to have all the power. That's what they want. That's what they're telling you in a nutshell. They don't really want any structural change. They don't want to change material conditions. They don't want to re-articulate history in any meaningful way. They just want aesthetics. In the end of the way, they want to paint things in a different color, but keep the same material structure. So, what were the main talking points that you had during this conversation?
Yeah, we discussed. Well, first of all, the debate was over Ukraine and Russia. So I was talking about the 2014 U.S. backed coup in Ukraine. And he
Hmm.
basically just kept fixating on the dates. He would be like, well, what date did this event happen? I would tell him within a month, and he would say, well, what day? And then he'd go, you don't even know the day? Like, how can I trust you that it happened? I'm like, okay, I guess next time I'll write down the exact time that every single event happened. So denied that, and then was asking me the specific NGOs that funneled money into Ukraine. So I gave him like Rockefeller Foundation, Ford Foundation, the National Endowment for Democracy. And he goes, well, give me specific examples of people who they funded. And I said, well, Victoria Nuland, there was a leaked video of her saying, who's the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, we have funneled $3 million into Ukraine to influence their politics through these groups. And he goes, well, give me specifics. You know, which groups were funded by which NGOs. I'm like, I don't know. And then he's like, oh, you don't even know. How can I trust? So it was shit like that where he would just try and narrow it in on the minutia. You know, what was the exact time that this happened, so he could ignore the broader argument I was making.
Right. So he will just attack your credibility without engaging on the topic.
Yes, and then what he does is appeal to the hegemonic narrative because, you know, liberal media is pumping Putin's evil. He invaded Ukraine unprovoked. He's insane, which is basically what Vaush said at the end, that Putin's just insane and he did this irrationally for no reason. So he appeals to that mainstream logic that he knows a lot of people who aren't educated on the issue are going to default to.
Yeah, appeal to rationality is strange, but it's very liberal in the sense that it's a modern tradition. Like philosophically speaking, they will think about reason and they will appeal to reason, but that only gives away their tendencies to market logic. Because in a way, if you are already saying that there is reason to be achieved and reason should be the main driver of the pursuit of truth, then you are already pre-adhering yourself to the logic of the market and the invisible hand and the eventual self-regulation of markets, because you think we're reasonable actors in a reasonable market taking reasonable decisions, but it's not necessarily reason that guides the movement of history. I think that for me the debates have been mostly like spotting the idealism. Like once you spot the idealism, then you can tear it down pretty easily. And I find it very helpful that once they appeal to reason, what you have to ask them is what is their theory of language and their theory of subjectivity. Because then you will force them into a position where they have to feel, okay, so how does subjectivity emerges? And how is a subject constituted? Because as materialists coming from Marxism, we understand that coming out of Hegel's dialectic of the master-slave, transforming to a material dialectic, it's our relationship to work and to nature that constitutes subjectivity. But in idealism, they will really struggle to give you a theory of subjectivity. Subjectivity is either a spontaneous metaphysical emergence that is in the void, it's out of nowhere, but then they will have to explain language without the social contingency, or they have to adhere to the fact that language is a social production, and then they will give primacy to the community before the individual. So then, yes, is the community that constitutes the individual. So then you can bring them back into the conversation, but with them already adhering to the logic that the subject, it's only a product of the community or the society before him, or the group before him. And it's so weird because like most of these debate tactics, they are self-defeating, and they're easily self-defeating, but they will, as you said, no, like you try to be the nice guy, you try to respond to the questions, and he will just like trap you in that endless cycle and push you to the limit where you are, man, I don't know exactly the minute where the invasion started, what do you want me to say? Then we'll say you will have no credibility. It's ridiculous.
Right. Yeah, that would have been a good tactic. There's definitely, I mean, it was only the third debate that I had done. And there's like rewatching it, there's stuff like that I picked out that I could have done better. And then through conversations with people like you, I feel like I've learned a lot for going into the next debate. So that's something good that came out of it too, is I feel like I learned some stuff.
Yeah, and it's crazy because as soon as the debate ends, you see their content and nothing changed. Like they don't pivot like 1 degree. They learn nothing new from conversations. It's ridiculous. It's like they're empty vessels just repeating propaganda. It's crazy, man. It drives me really insane.
It's so true. It's like what Carlos and I were saying was it makes Socratic dialogue impossible
Yeah.
because one person's not there to be honest. They're not there to learn something. They're not there to find a common understanding and approach truth, as we say in philosophy.
No.
They're just there to torture you, try and, ruin your credibility and then appeal to their audience and make a lot of money.
No, yeah, absolutely, 100%. Like I turned down most debates exactly because of that point of view. And the other thing is that now in Latin America, what is really common, and I don't know if Vosh can be put in that list, but there's a lot of these public figures defending pro-capitalist positions from both sides, from the left and the right, but pro-capitalist position, either woke or very like, they say I'm liberal economically, but conservative morally.
Mm-hmm.
This is the most common position right now in Latin America. And most of them are funded by Atlas Foundation, Heritage Foundation. They're funded by the Koch brothers. But it's the direct money, Like they even show up with the logos behind. They don't care anymore. And what people don't understand is that there's no debates with these people because they're on a salary. They're on a payroll. Like they cannot give a point, even if you like shove truth down their throats. They will never accept it because it's against their paycheck.
Right. Some people who really enjoyed Jordan Peterson's work because he kind of does self-help stuff and a lot of young men were drawn to it. But a lot of them are like dumbfounded now. They're like, it seems like he's just a conservative ideologue now. I'm like, yeah, he hooked up with a bunch of libertarian think tanks and NGOs. That's his job,
Yeah.
He's not going to change his opinion if it hurts his paycheck.
It's incredible. Well, your room seems pretty clean, so it seems like you've been paying attention. It's crazy. No, but it's true. Peterson was, and this is a crazy story. He was here about 4 months ago, and I was actually invited to the same conference with him. But I think the people that were curating the speakers didn't necessarily knew me. They just knew I was very famous, so they invited me as well because Diego, he speaks about philosophy. But then it got to a point in the ladder where somebody said like, "Are you fucking insane? The guy's openly a communist. Like, we're not gonna have him." And I was deemed. I was like, they retired my invitation to the conversation.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's a piece of shit. So what I did is that I spent a full afternoon on Twitch reviewing his debate with Zizek and how raped he got during that debate. So at least people would know that they were listening to a loser, figuratively and literally speaking.
Right. That's perfect. That's wild. And those are the people who claim to support the free expression of ideas, the battleground of ideas, but then not if you're a communist. Apparently.
Yeah, the ones that don't change their mind, right?
Right.
Yeah, the free thinkers are the ones that rarely change their mind. It's so intense. So Eddie, what current projects are you working on, man? Like if people will follow you, they were interested in your work, in your projects. Where can they see you? Where can they follow you?
Yeah, you can follow us, Midwestern Marx, on Twitch, YouTube, and Twitter, and Instagram, and then on TikTok, we're Edward M. Liger or Ed B. Liger. We have 2 accounts now because we've had 7 of our accounts banned on there. So no promises if you follow us on TikTok that the account's going to make it more than an hour. But yeah, we are on there posting regularly. I'm currently working on a book related about Venezuela and U.S. imperialism in Venezuela, but it's all going to tie back to the U.S. and explain why we actually need a socialist revolution here in the United States. So yeah, that'll be coming out this summer probably.
That sounds really interesting. Do you mind elaborating a little bit on that, because the project sounds super interesting?
Thanks. Yeah, it's I wrote my senior thesis about Venezuela like 3 years ago because I had this economics professor who told me that socialism never works. Just look at Venezuela.
Who was he, Mrs. Von
Yeah, yeah, and I pressured her on that, and her answer didn't make any sense to me. So I started researching Venezuela, and I was like, oh, she was full of shit. Imperialism hurt Venezuela, not socialism. So I wrote my thesis on that, and now I want to expand it into a book. But I also want to use Venezuela to tackle some of the contentious issues in the U.S. Like there's this big debate around what we call national historical nihilism in the U.S., where people, they look at the imperialist hegemon that our country is, and they want to throw away our entire revolutionary history and not recapture figures like Abraham Lincoln, who led the Union in the Civil War against slavery. So I want to talk about the Bolivarian Revolution and the way that the Venezuelans hold up Bolivar as this revolutionary figure and hold up their socialist revolution as sort of a continuation of the independence movement that began with Bolivar. And, ask the question, can we do something similar here in the U.S.? Can we unite all of the left-leaning groups and parties here in the U.S. and recapture our country's history in a way to lead a sort of mass movement against the imperialists and against the oligarchs. So yeah, some things like that, and I'm excited about it. I think it'll be good.
That sounds super cool, man. I don't know if how familiar you are with the work of Walter Benjamin. I would imagine like very, very much. But I think like Walter Benjamin will provide so much insight regarding this notion of how to reread history. I don't know what is I read most of Benjamin in Spanish, but they say that we have to treat history backwards, in a sense, like since history is told by the winners and we won't know the full history until we reconstitute the notion of the losers. But we also have to read history in backwards, and especially in the US. I've never thought about this before your comment, the fact that you are this, I mean, the US is the center of propaganda and this version of history that we are emerging globally because of the dominance of the entertainment industry and how we perceive the individualism as the narrative meritocracy, and is supported as an overarching meta-narrative that just fits the mold and is modularized and repeated everywhere. It's interesting. I think Benjamin will be a very powerful tool to provide some extra insight to your research.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I'll definitely. I know Carlos is a huge fan of Walter Benjamin, but
I am.
I
adore the guy. I used to read him like all the time. It makes a lot of sense with history. So that's cool. So you're writing a book as well, and you're also an active part of. So let's go now into Midwestern Marx. Like, what is your main goal? How you guys organize? What are your day-to-day activities?
Yeah, we see ourselves as an educational outlet, a theoretical outlet, helping organize people. So we do multiple streams a week, like 4 or 5 live streams a week, and cut the videos into clips and put them on our YouTube. We do short TikTok propaganda videos, obviously, which have been incredibly successful, more than we probably could have expected.
Yeah, I love them. They're so good. Your reacts are so good, man. Yeah, your reacts are like the best.
I'm glad you like them. I got to do more. Yeah, and that shows like the popularity of those TikTok shows how Americans are starting to embrace these ideas or open up to these ideas at least. Yeah. So we do that, but yeah, I mean, we've always seen like a lack of theoretical understanding in the Western left, a lack of theoretical rigor and theoretical education overall that we think might alleviate a lot of the problems that have plagued the American left forever, and the European left too, honestly. So that's what we see our goal at, or I mean, our place as. We're also doing hosting classes now, weekly classes. So we've got a Basics of Marxism class that we've got 35 people attending right now. So me, Carlos, and our other editor, Noah, have been bringing them into a Zoom and interacting with them directly, teaching them and doing readings, which I think is huge, and want to do more of those in the future.
That's awesome. I had a couple of interactions with Noah before on Twitter as well. The guy is a sweetheart. Like he's too cool. Like he's too nice and too like gentle and like warm-hearted. It's crazy. Like the way he treats people on Twitter. I mean, I'm meaner in real life. It's insane that he can be that nice in Twitter. It's just like I read him is like an exercise in stoicism. It's insane. Like if you can send him my regards, the guy's a genius. So now the people on the top on the chat, we're gonna open the last 15 minutes of the conversation to some questions. I can translate them if you want, and I can even translate Eddie's response back in Spanish if you guys are not proficient. Since the subtitles are not available in real time, they will be available later when I upload the conversation. So for now, we're gonna open the floor for a couple of questions, and during that time, Eddie, I was gonna ask you about like this meme war that is currently going on, and the fact that like for a very long time we heard that the left couldn't meme, and we're learning and we're catching up with this notion, and also the fact that the left, even the title left, was hijacked by liberal wokeism and doesn't necessarily reflect any subversivity or any more revolutionary spirits. So how do we deal with this changing nominalism, given the fact that the nomenclature left has been completely hijacked by liberalism?
It's a good question, and it's a huge issue in America. There's so many liberals, we call them rad libs or radical liberals, who are masquerading as Marxists. So we stopped using the term leftist for a while, but it's just kind of such an easy term to use to lump people in. And so what we've started doing, and there have also been some Marxists in America who have taken a really like hardcore stance against these people to the point of maybe being abrasive and a little bit alienating. So what we've tried to do is criticize wokeism from a philosophical perspective, criticize its philosophical roots, its ideological roots, explain how they're different from Marxism. So we've done a whole bunch of videos about wokeism now, and what's been really helpful is Hans Georg Muller, this German philosopher, now based in, I think, Beijing. But he did an analysis of wokeism in the way that, this sort of aesthetic of radicalism isn't the same as actually supporting class struggle and anti-imperialism. So we've tried to flesh that out and explain it. It's had a great effect on the people who follow us, but it's still a huge problem overall.
Yeah, I agree. I think this unwrapping of wokeism is helpful, but it's also hard against the short attention span of millennials and centennials, which is complicated, right? You have to prove them that liberalism is not necessarily revolutionary, that inclusion doesn't necessarily change power dynamics and relationships, that it doesn't necessarily solve for inequality or most of the life pains that people have on the day-to-day basis, but it's in the end people just want to buy a new pair of shoes and paint things in a different color and like forget about it. So there's a couple of questions, Eddie, if you don't mind. The first question is, what will be your goal, your conclusion? What are your aims and directions in this book about Venezuela? What would you like to prove as a thesis in the book?
I would like to prove that socialism didn't fail in Venezuela, and that imperialism is the reason for Venezuela's political and economic crises, and that socialism has greatly improved the standard of living for a lot of people in Venezuela, built a lot of schools, hospitals, things like that. So the name of the book is actually a play on a popular talking point in the U.S. I don't know if it is in Mexico or Latin America at all, but what about Venezuela?
Vuvuzela.
Yeah, Venezuela. Yeah. What about Venezuela? No iPhone. Socialism doesn't work. So the name of the book is What About Venezuela? How Socialism Worked in Venezuela and It Can Work Here Too. So that'll be the thesis, how socialism did actually work, how imperialism hurt Venezuela, but and how the U.S. actually needs socialism if we're going to alleviate our own problems.
Which leads perfectly into the next question. Where was it? I think I lost it. There you go. So what's your take on China, and what can we learn from China at the moment? Like it's so good as a communicator to have China as an example, because it's like, oh my God, it just works so well. And finally, a president or a prime minister that understands dialectical materialism is just like a dream.
It's so true. Yeah. And like when I first got into Marxism, I couldn't believe there were so many socialists who I'm a socialist, but I condemn China. Like, why? China's a perfect example of how Marxism can work. Like, they've abolished poverty. Even the UN and the World Bank now have been like, holy shit, how did they do this? So yeah, we're extremely pro-China, not only in supporting their poverty alleviation, but also their foreign policy is huge. The win-win trade relations, the foreign policy of mutual benefit and complete non-interventionism is moving us towards a multipolar world, and China's leading that charge. So every socialist, we think, should support China with their role as an anti-imperialist country, their role in developing the productive forces, not only in their country but around the world. And I was going to say something else, but yeah, they're great. And what their academics are doing in advancing the science of Marxism and dialectical materialism, it's just unbelievable. So yeah.
I recently released a video. I think it was 1 week or 2 weeks ago. And given the fact that one of my best friends from Brazil is moving to work in China with a Bank of BRICS, and the fact that we, as dialectical materialists, we have to understand that the way material forces relate to each other is contingent, nationally and geographically as well, not only historically. But we have to understand that the reading of dialectical materialism has to be done nationally. And the moments for revolution and the moments for historical changes are contingent to the nation. So in that sense, yes, I support 100% what's going on in China. Their foreign policy, it's amazing. The fact that they empower so much the workers, and they make the market work from a planned perspective in the benefit of the workers, and to empower the workers to build thousands of kilometers of rails. It's insane. It's like a dream for most of the world. But we also have to understand that their model is not necessarily replicable in other countries. That we have to learn how they apply the method, and we need to apply the method likewise. We cannot just jump into the same conclusions as they were, because their national problem was different, the barrier of language was different, their territorial position and geographical strategy is different. So we have to use the same method, but not necessarily copy the same strategies. I think like this is the only shade of gray that I will add to the conversation, to people to reading to this. Another one, let me give you another one. There's a couple of good ones here. This one could be good. Let's see. It says the question might be for both of you guys, if you may. What's our best bet as millennials to deal or fight back against the household crisis in a short, middle, long term? If you want.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's a major issue in the U.S. and I mean, especially after 2008 with the housing crisis, it's something that people are aware of, and that is still sort of traumatic on their consciousness. And yeah, I don't know. You want to take a stab at this question first while I try and think of a better answer?
Yeah, I think this is a major pain for our generation. Like I've hit on this keynote for a very long time now, that this is the generation that will not own anything, and they will probably die in debt. And I'm very cold and harsh about this, because this is something that nobody will fight for them. If they don't organize and they don't understand this in a very cold way, they will lose this battle for sure, and it will be a very dramatic defeat. The fact that most of this generation won't have property they won't have a place to die in. You will die in debt, even for your coffin. And as cold as it sounds, it's probably very close to reality. And I think property of housing, it's, according to me, actually the first priority in what this generation is to fight for. Because I think other properties of means of production will probably take longer in a dialectical analysis. But housing, it's a very immediate property that gives life stability. And in a moment where this historical nihilism has taken over our ability to plan our lives and make dreams for our future, we are in a way deprived of the ability to dream, deprived of the ability to plan for a better future, because we are sold instability as liberty. We are sold this notion that you can hop from one job to another, and you can rent today and move to Airbnb tomorrow and then live on the street in a few months. And this is sold to us as liberty. And according to me, this nightmare of being trapped in nostalgia, in metaphysical liberty, is metaphysical freedom, is what is really dangerous. So according to me, the fight for housing and dignified, minimal housing, as it was in the USSR and as it is in a lot of socialist countries, with a cap on price and with a cap on profit, it's very, very important. So that to me is one of the main battles that the youth needs to fight right now.
That was much better than I could have ever explained, and you even gave me some new ideas there for how to explain this to people. But I mean, as far as how immediate of a thing this is, like in the U.S., there are more empty homes than there are homeless people.
Yeah,
so we've got the vacant houses to put people in. They don't need to be built. They're there. So it's one of the most obvious glaring problems of our system. Where we've got enough houses to house everyone, but we don't. So for why? So landlords can make a profit.
Yeah. If you're interested in this topic, Eddie, I will highly recommend that you research into the MST movement from Brazil, Movimento Sem Terra. So it's incredible. It's one of the most powerful Marxist movements in Latin America. They're self-organized, and what they do is that they appropriate unused housing and unused land around the country. And they have become like this huge force for good. And it's something interesting. They are the number one sales of organic rice in the country. And they do it in expropriated land that they take from people that don't use their lands. So it's a super, super cool story. The MST movement from Brazil, I think, is a very cool example. And the fact that what you mentioned, like this huge wave of homelessness in America, at the same time where you have like this astrophysical vacancy just provides the perfect link for a revolutionary force. For people to say, you are forced to live on the street because you cannot afford homes, and the pricing of homes is artificially kept high just because of capital gain. Like this is a perfect struggle for a revolutionary movement. And I think there are several examples around the world.
Absolutely. That reminds me, I had some friends called Cobb on Wood, and you can support them if you want. We're trying to build. They were building houses for homeless people in an area that nobody was using, and the cops came and kicked them off and destroyed all the houses that they had built. But that shows. I mean, you can organize people against that for sure. It's
absolutely
perfect.
So I'm going to put a last question on the screen, Eddie. Even if the question is not exactly what I wanted to ask you, it will help us lead into the debate. It says, what is the best alternative to capitalism? And I think we agree with the notion of dialectical materialism. But to lead people like this and understanding that is always somebody's first video, what will be the initial readings that you will recommend to the viewers?
I would say Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific. That's great. That'll kind of explain what the alternative to capitalism is, how socialism develops out of capitalism, and how building socialism is sort of the work of the future, the work of the revolutionaries and workers after they seize power. So I'd say Utopian and Scientific. State and Revolution is another must read. I always say imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, but that might be a little specific to people in the U.S. just because we are it's a great book for anybody, but especially if you're in the imperialist hegemon. So, I would start with those three, and then maybe Wage, Labor, and Capital by Marx. But
Volume 1 is mandatory according to me. Like I always recommend. I always have my copy right here somewhere. My copy of Volume 1 in Spanish that I have for references. Having said, Eddie, thank you so much for the conversation, man. It was a real pleasure. As I say, and I learned this from a friend of mine from Spain, that he says we are not necessarily anti-capitalists, we're post-capitalists, because we understand that capitalism is a necessary stage of the material development of history, but we want to get past that because we see the contradictions, and we don't want the paradoxes and the contradictions to stay alive for longer than they need to, because otherwise they start producing more unnecessary suffering on the world, and we want to get past that. It doesn't necessarily mean we antagonize on the necessary development processes of the capacity to produce for everyone, but we also understand that there are better organization forms that can be achieved on a different material relationship for the future. Having said that, Eddie, thank you so much for the conversation, man. How did you felt?
This is awesome. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Anytime you want to talk, let me know. I know Carlos would love to talk to you too.
For sure.
So,
we can do that. I will also, I will give you my channel anytime you want to use it or you want to have a conversation about any specific topics. Let us know. The fact that we have to help each other is very important for me. And I will also, if you will accept the invitation, I would like to connect you to some friends in Latin America and Spain. Even if we can have the conversation in English with a translator or whatnot, I think it's important for us to get together.
Yes, that would be great.
Awesome. So, Eddie, thank you so much. A todos los que estuvieron con nosotros hasta aquí, hasta el final, hermoso, sensual y altamente desechable capital humano. Un gusto, espero les haya gustado. Como siempre, dejen sus comentarios acá abajo, después los vamos a leer, después ahí les comento y les contesto. Vayan a seguir a Eddie, a sus páginas de internet. Les dejé también el link para que vayan a ver a Midwestern Marx Institute, para que puedan ver su trabajo, para que puedan hacer educación, lecturas y puedan checar otros comentarios sobre el tema. Siempre es bueno, sus memes son buenísimos, su cuenta de Twitter es una joya. No la vayan a perder, vale muchísimo la pena. Nada, Eddie, camarada, muchas gracias. So I'm ending the